Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the garage. Gerald here with you. Of course, we are in the midst of award season. We are in the thick of it. Pretty much all of the major awards bodies have now given their nominations for the Year in Film 2024. And of course, that includes the elusive Academy Award nominations that we just got in recent days. A little project I like to do every year, really for me, is I like to mix my two favorite things when it comes to movies. Horror films and the Academy Awards. Two things that I am truly obsessed with, and if you follow this channel, you probably know that. So I do this thing every year where I say, what if the Academy could only choose from horror films for their nominees and performances? Top of the line. If this becomes popular enough, I could really go to the bottom of the line, especially when you start looking at stuff like production design, makeup and hairstyling, costumes. It is a travesty to me that horror does not show up in these categories more often. This year is extremely exciting, where this project that I do every year maybe will become less of a fantasy and more of a reality down the road, because we got The Substance getting multiple nominations this year, including for Best Picture, Best Actress, and Best Director for Coralie Farja. We also got Robert Eggers' Nosferatu gothic horror film receiving 4 Academy Award nominations for a lot of those same categories I just mentioned, including makeup, cinematography, and more. However, those are just nominations. As much as I hope those films are able to win some awards this year, the Academy's history with horror films does not paint that in a favorable light. Only one horror movie in the 97-year history of the Academy Awards has won Best Picture. Jonathan Demme's The Silence of the Lambs, which ironically, a lot of fans and people in the horror community debate whether or not that is a true horror film, as it is a little bit more of a serial killer thriller, and now serial killer is its own kind of subgenre in horror. I do definitely categorize Silence of the Lambs in the horror family of films. Now that's Best Picture. Some performances over the years that showed up in horror films have won the Academy Award in their respective categories. We just mentioned Silence of the Lambs, which was a big one across the board that year in 1991. Jodie Foster won for Best Actress. Anthony Hopkins won that year for Best Actor, which a lot of people thought that was category fraud, which is still popping up some 30-something years later, because he was thought to be supporting, but was campaigned in lead and ended up winning that award. You also have a few other ones throughout history, like Ruth Gordon from Rosemary's Baby, or how about one of my favorites from the 1991 Academy Awards, Kathy Bates, in the Stephen King adaptation Misery, directed by Rob Reiner. The most recent win in the horror genre, win in any category in the horror genre when it comes to acting, again, would toe the line between horror and psychological thriller, is Natalie Portman for her phenomenal out-of-body experience that was her performance in Black Swan in 2010. Now, recently, horror has been almost blanked at the Academy Awards in the last 7 years or so. You have to go all the way back to 2017, when Jordan Peele leapt into the horror zeitgeist with his film Get Out, as it was nominated for Best Screenplay that year, as well as Daniel Kaluuya landing a Best Actor nomination for the film. There's some highbrow, high-level horror films in recent years, like Midsommar or even Hereditary, that have just not gotten the mentions that I feel like they deserve, whether you're talking about Toni Collette or Florence Pugh, or even some of the technical achievements below the line for these films. So I thought, why don't we inject some horror into the Academy? What I have done for the major categories, the 4 acting categories, and the Best Picture, I'm going to tell you, if the Academy could only pick from the horror genre, what do I think the nominees would have been this year? And it's also going to be a way for me to celebrate some of the best things that the horror genre had to offer us when you're talking about the level of craft and the quality that went into a lot of these films and performances. At what I guess I would call the horror Oscars, but it's like one word, so R-O-S-C-A-R-S. No, not good. Actress in a supporting role. I'm going to show the slide and then I'm going to list these and then I'm going to talk about each one of them briefly. Chloe East for Heretic. Katie O'Brien for Love Lies Bleeding. Margaret Qualley for The Substance, Liza Soberano for Lisa Frankenstein, and Alicia Weir for Abigail. These 5 ladies got little to no mention on the award circuit this year, with the exception of maybe Margaret Qualley, a name that I know you guys are familiar with if you follow the Academy Awards, as her turn as Sue in The Substance got a lot of notoriety. Let's start with her. Margaret Qualley turns in a bit of a subdued, but yet colorful and eye-popping performance in The Substance as Sue. She beautifully mirrors and complements the lead role, Ran here, by Demi Moore, who I think is on her way to a Best Actress award. Margaret Qualley just missed the 5 that would have been required for supporting actress, but she was probably at number 6 or 7 on that list. Just a near miss. She gives us a tender, innocent girl that is fallen into this scenario and into this world almost like a newborn baby and just trying to figure out what the hell is going on. And after we are introduced to her in the film, throughout the rest of the course of the movie, we get to see this greed and appetite for fame and for success, how we are viewed in the spotlight, kind of take her over. Which is ironic, being that Demi Moore's character was craving all of those things initially, which what led her to partake of The Substance to begin with. I think it's a shame that Margaret Qualley is not in the Academy 5 this year, as she, among the ones I just listed, was definitely the closest one to breaking into that mold. But The Substance did get a lot of love this year, and for that, I'm super grateful. How about Liza Soberano for Lisa Frankenstein? This is a horror comedy that was written by Diablo Cody, and the film was directed by the late Robin Williams' daughter, Zelda Williams, in her feature film directorial debut. Liza in this film plays the adopted sister of Lisa Swallows in the film. Lisa Swallows, of course, portrayed here by, I would say, newly minted scream queen Katherine Newton. But Liza embodies this popular girl in high school, the cheerleader, who all the boys want to be with, all the girls want to be, but she has that popularity at school, but she still is very true to the relationship she has with her adopted sister, Lisa. And throughout the whole movie, she acts as a bit of a best friend and companion to Lisa, despite her kind of weird goth girl mentality that Liza can't really connect to in the film, being that she is a cheerleader preppy girl. She's not going to be going to the graveyard to hang out with Lisa, but she will support her sister if that's what she's into. Next would be Katie O'Brien from a little film called Love Lies Bleeding, directed by the phenomenally gifted Rose Glass, who directed Saint Maud as her original. This is her follow-up, of course, starring Kristen Stewart in the lead role, and Katie O'Brien plays Jackie. The film takes place in the 1980s, and Jackie comes to this small town, kind of a mysterious newcomer that Kristen Stewart's character of Lou is attracted to immediately. And I mean attracted to emotionally and mentally, but also physically, as the two of them develop a pretty sensual romance throughout the course of the film. They essentially fall in love, and Katie O'Brien's character ultimately commits crimes for that love and to protect Lou in the film. It then becomes a bit of a crime thriller where the two of them are essentially on the run from various characters in the film, most notably Lou's father, played just menacingly brilliant by Ed Harris. There's a lot of surrealism to the story in Love Lies Bleeding, and Rose Glass does a phenomenal job at putting you in a dreamlike setting, but everything is still real that's happening. Sometimes we see things that are actually happening in a bit of a fantastical light. It's brilliantly done, and Katie O'Brien's performance is one of the more layered, nuanced things in this film that really helps you connect to the dream, but also keeps you grounded. Alicia Weir in Abigail, I want to talk about briefly. Weir plays the titular Abigail in this bloody, gruesome horror film featuring her as a young vampire. She's 14 years old in real life. I think in the movie she was meant to play like a 12-year-old girl who essentially is kidnapped because she is the daughter of a wealthy nobleman. The folks that kidnap her, all they have to do is keep her held hostage for one night, and then in the morning they will collect the ransom. The only problem is they didn't realize that they kidnapped a bloodthirsty vampire. Weir really stood out in this movie to me because, first of all, it's a child actor, in a horror film, and those do not typically blow you away in terms of performance. But Alicia Weir did. She was carrying her own and bouncing off of these other big stars in this film. Melissa Barrera, Dan Stevens, Catherine Newton, who I mentioned before, Lisa Frankenstein is also in this film. And you would never know that she was 12 years old. She was right there giving it her all. And she was a very menacing, but also kind of adorable figure as this vampire in the movie. You're scared of her in the beginning, and then you begin to kind of sympathize with her character as the movie goes on. And all of that hinges on Alicia Weir's performance, which I thought was one of the more understated and overlooked performances in horror this year. And lastly in this category, let's talk about Chloe East from a film called Heretic. The film has a mammoth performance from Hugh Grant at the center. Just absolutely off the wall, probably the best performances of his career, definitely one of. And then you have an up-and-comer, Sophie Thatcher, who plays opposite Chloe East in this film. The two of them, Thatcher and Grant, I was very familiar with, and I was almost expecting to be blown away by their performances, and I was. But what took me by surprise, by 10,000 miles in this film, was Chloe East. She gives this very quiet, very innocent, very gullible performance that just oozes with naivety, but also with smarts and intelligence. And she is a character that kind of tiptoes around the situation to ultimately be the heroine of the film. And her just like real life reaction to what was happening, I really connected to in this movie. And like I said, it absolutely floored me. Chloe East is an actress that I will be looking out for literally anytime she's billed in anything going forward. After seeing her in Heretic, I feel the same way really about Sophie Thatcher in this film also. And then let's face it, we've all been tracking Hugh Grant since Love Actually, so he doesn't have to worry. Next up would be my nominees, if horror invaded the Oscars, for Best Supporting Actor, actor in a supporting role. My nominees would be Kevin Bacon for Maxine, Nicholas Hoult for Nosferatu, Michael Keaton for Beetlejuice, Bill Skarsgård for Nosferatu, and Dan Stevens for Abigail. Some funny ones here. You know, the comedy is another area that the Academy Awards typically stay away from for some reason, for the most part. I'll start by talking about Dan Stevens in Abigail. He could get a nomination alone if these awards existed, based on his line delivery that I'm going to play for you right now.
I got him!
Sammy, those are fucking onions.
Well...
Gotta be one of the best line deliveries literally in the history of cinema. But Dan Stevens' character in this film, without giving away too much to spoil it, you are drawn to him as an actor in general. He also had a great performance in a semi-horror film this year called Cuckoo. The guy is a great actor who knows the genre. He knows the audience that he's playing to. He's hilarious, he's menacing, he's sympathetic, and you never really know where he stands. Is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? Am I supposed to love him this much? And all of that is swirling around Stevens' phenomenal performance. Along with Alicia Weir that I mentioned earlier, Dan Stevens really helps anchor this film. Keep it funny, keep it light, but also keep you kind of on the edge of your seat. Speaking of comic turns, Kevin Bacon in Maxine was absolutely had me rolling in my chair in the theater. He plays this Bayou, New Orleans detective in the film who is a PI, a private investigator that's been hired to kind of figure out what Maxine's past is. The reason I love Kevin Bacon and why I would easily put him in a category of the best supporting horror roles of the year is because he is having the time of his life. He is absolutely chewing scenery, but he does it in a way that doesn't take away from the other actors or the other things that might be happening in the scene. He just complements everything that he's a part of in this movie, namely the performance of Mia Goth and some of the technical achievements that we see in this film from Ty West that are truly phenomenal, whether you're talking about the callback to the old Argento-style filmmaking that we see in a lot of different scenes in this movie. Kevin Bacon never takes us out of that atmospheric element. You never think that he's going to be the one that's going to save the day or he's going to put the cuffs on Maxine, but that's the point. You know, he's just kind of there as this aloof detective with this crazy fucking accent, weird neck brace, the costuming, the glasses. And I also love that he is in this horror movie getting this shout out for me when his career really started all the way back in the 80s in horror. And he's kind of calling back to that. I mean, of course, it's not the first time he's done that, but I absolutely love that too. We could kind of keep in the comedic or the horror comedy realm with Beetlejuice, which of course stars Michael Keaton in that titular Beetlejuice role. Did I just say it 3 times? The Academy Award nominations just were released a few days ago. Beetlejuice got no nominations, whether it be for costume design, production design, VFX, makeup. It was in the running for all of those I just mentioned and received 0, which is a shame. But Michael Keaton, I think, deserves, frankly, an actual Academy Award nomination for his portrayal of Beetlejuice. And I'm talking about from the original film all the way up to the sequel. If we see this character again in the future, I would be front in line to see that. He basically created an icon from the ground up with his performance at the core. The screenplay was there, but he took it and made it his own, turned it into kind of like this creepy, almost zombie-esque, gross character that permeates the entire proceedings in both films. I know this film and the narrative around it, the screenplay around it, was a little more divisive than the original film. Maybe it was a little too heavy-handed on the nostalgia. But as a fan of Michael Keaton and of this character specifically, if any horror character in the history of horror movies, what would be on the Mount Rushmore of horror characters? Because you're going to immediately think Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, Freddy Krueger, Leatherface, Chucky. And I'm not saying you're wrong, and I don't know what 4 I would pick for the Mount Rushmore, but I will tell you this, Beetlejuice is in the conversation, and frankly, it's because of Michael Keaton's portrayal of that character. And then I'll cover 2 real quick from a little film called Nosferatu, which did get some love at the Academy this year. Like I said at the top of the video, it was nominated for 4 below-the-line technical Academy Awards, and it's well-deserved. I think it might even be able to win a couple of those. When it comes to the performances, Bill Skarsgård and his transformation as Count Orlok in this film is nothing short of brilliant. It's also awe-inspiring that makes me wonder, what am I doing with my life? This dude spent time with an opera coach to lower the register of his voice so much to meet the inflection of a Transylvania count from the 1800s and what they would have sounded like in Germany. He did it so much and was so deep in his voice that I heard in an interview with Robert Eggers that they did not have to alter it in any way aside from just amplifying the volume. They didn't have to change the bass. They didn't have to add in any effects. That's what the words sound like coming out of his mouth naturally.
It is a black omen to journey in poor health.
And not only that, the physical performance. The dude is menacing. He is a menacing shadow in this movie that just moves around. It's almost like Negative Space, except this giant vampire, gross beast is there. But he kind of slithers through the scenes that he's in. And especially when he has his scenes face to face with Lily Rose Depp's Ellen in the movie, we get some of the more nuanced and brilliant delivery of dialogue in the film. Again, using that deep register Count Transylvania-esque voice, but delivering really poetic messages flawlessly in this film to essentially the object of his desire. And the other performance in Nosferatu that I want to give love to on this video, Nicholas Hoult portraying Thomas Hutter in the film, Ellen's husband. Nicholas Hoult needs a nomination really because of the year he had in 2024. Not only his performance in Nosferatu, he was also in The Order, which is a brilliant crime thriller that takes place in the 80s. And he was in, probably most notably, Juror Number 2. He plays kind of this blue-collar, small-town family man who finds himself in the middle of this very elaborate court case where he's on the jury. But in Nosferatu, a lot of people, when the movie came out, would say, is this a romance? Ellen and Orlok. Is this a vampire, sensual love story? I would say yes, but the love story is between Ellen and Thomas. Orlok is basically a predator in this film, and Ellen can't figure out why her desire and her kind of attachment to Orlok won't break free. But Nicholas Hoult is the most devout husband that I can even express to you, to Ellen in this film. He literally would go to the ends of the earth for her to essentially save her soul without being too dramatic. He brilliantly captures the time period with his accent, of course, costuming. The best thing about Nicholas Holt's performance in this film is because of his reactionary acting to Orlok. We see the fear in his face, in his mannerisms, in his body, in his restless sleeping through the night. He acts physically in all of those scenes to translate the fear and what it must feel like to be in the presence of that shadow-producing beast in the film. And that really resonated with me. I was scared of Orlok before I even heard him or saw him because of Nicholas Holt's performance. Next up would be my nominees at the Horror Oscars. Rolls right off the tongue. For actress in a leading role, Juliette Garepi for Red Rooms. Demi Moore for The Substance. Ding, 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 ding. Lupita Nyong'o for A Quiet Place, Day One. Lily Rose Depp for Nosferatu. And Naomi Scott for Smile 2. We'll talk about Demi Moore first, seeing as she did receive an Academy Award nomination this year for her turn in The Substance as Elizabeth Sparkle. So Demi Moore is an actress that has been in Hollywood for nearly 50 years. I think she said 45 or 46 years when she made her Golden Globe speech. And Elizabeth Sparkle in The Substance is a very popular kind of aerobics talk show host who is aging out of that celebrity and of what the public eye and the men in charge of the television studio, etc., want from their host. Basically, they don't think she's youthful enough or hot enough anymore. Which, by the way, have you seen Demi Moore? I disagree. But herein lies our conflict with Elizabeth and eventually with Sue, and kind of catapults us into the general narrative of The Substance. It's really a film about aging out in Hollywood or in the public eye. It also is a bit of a commentary, a social commentary, on how we as the public and audiences for popular things like TV shows, like movies, etc., how we view women in that space and how they are expected to look. Are they expected by the norms in society to look like Demi Moore in The Substance or more like Margaret Qualley in The Substance? And that is a dilemma that Coralie Farja puts right on the table for you, right on your plate. Demi Moore takes those parallels to her own career in Hollywood, having done it for nearly 5 decades, and applies it to her performance in this film. And because of that personal attachment to it and that intimate connection that she has to the source material, we get something truly phenomenal here, where this is easily, in my opinion, the best performances of her career. I think it could go down as one of the best performances in any horror movie in the history of horror movies. By the way, this is just the Horror Oscars, but I think she's on her way to the Academy Award win for leading actress. Lupita Nyong'o in A Quiet Place, Day One gives a performance to be rivaled among some of the best in the horror genre in the last 5 to 6 years. And most of it is a dialogue-free, silent performance. In the first 20 to 30 minutes of the film, we do hear her having conversations and talking. And frankly, a lot of those scenes are brilliant as well and funny. She's very funny in this film despite what her character is going through. She has a sense of humor to her, which immediately connects us to her character. When we get into the invasion of the alien monsters in the film, much like I said with Nicholas Holt in the previous category, Lupita Nyong'o's fearful acting and the fear in her eyes and mannerisms and the reactionary things to the monsters speak to us, and it makes us know how we should feel. And also when her character has that moment, that pivotal moment in the film, when her arc kind of changes and her mentality changes a bit as well, we feel that with her and we almost go right along with her as well. We're not scared anymore. We're going to do what she's doing. Lupita Nyong'o is one of the greatest actors of our generation, previous Academy Award nominee. This is not the first time she's done this in the horror genre, by the way. One of the horror snubs in recent years, I mentioned a couple of them earlier, would also be her for Jordan Peele's Us. She could have very easily been in the Academy Award actress discussion that year, and she actually was for a little while until it fizzled out. She does similar work here in A Quiet Place Day One, which is also a franchise that could be seen as, okay, we've done this. We know what this is. We get it. But her performance brings something else to it that made this one of the better films in the franchise. Juliette Garepi's turn in Red Rooms would go down as the most haunting performance of the year in any film. She is a character who portrays our overzealousness and our morbid fascination with true crime in our society, in the world. A lot of people in this world, particularly in America, are obsessed with true crime, are obsessed with serial killers, are obsessed with just these morbid tales of nonfiction. In Red Rooms, Juliette takes that to astonishing lengths, where as a viewer, without spoiling anything, I'll just say you are absolutely fascinated and you can't look away from her, which is a bit of a magic trick because characters like hers in the film can't look away from true crime. And we can't look away from her not looking away from true crime. It is a very meta, kind of encompassing film that drags you in, whether you want to be there or not. There's one scene in this film that I won't spoil for you in the courtroom, as there is a court case proceeding going on throughout the film following a serial killer who's on trial. There's a scene in there with her in the courtroom. I don't know if the best is the right word, but it's probably the most effective, haunting, soul-crushing scene I've ever seen. You frankly will not believe it, even seeing what you had been seeing throughout Red Rooms. And her performance brings that subtlety and just enough charm to it that you're connected to her, and then you don't know how to feel. I'll just leave it at that. Juliette Garepi, who is an actress I was not familiar with prior to Red Rooms, absolutely floored me in this movie. My last two that I'm going to mention in this category have similar reasons for being in my top 5 here. First up, let's talk about Naomi Scott for Smile 2. Her character in this film, who's being kind of haunted by these demonic entities that take the form of regular people around her, kind of smiling at her creepily. She again expresses that fear like a couple of other actors I've mentioned in these categories today, and what it must feel like to be chased by a demon, which is essentially what these movies hinge on. And I thought when they greenlit Smile 2 that it was going to be tough to continue this shtick. We get it. It was initially a short film, and then they turned that into a feature, which I really liked. And then they did this, and I'm like, why are we doing a sequel? I mean, what else can you do? What else you can do is you can not make it about the shtick. You can make it about the characters and make it a character piece with this horror stuff going on around that character. And what Parker Finn does brilliantly as a director, and of course also Naomi Scott in the performance, is she makes us come with her on the journey. She makes us feel for what she's gone through in her past as a pop star and why she fell from her success peak. But she also, of course, makes us feel for her based on what she's going through and these haunting emotions and visions that she's having. Of course, everybody around her, which is a horror trope, thinks she's crazy, right? She acts crazy in this film. Her facial expressions. And honestly, I think of Demi Moore in the mirror scene. Naomi Scott has a couple of those where she's wiping the tears off of her face very violently. She's screaming at basically negative space, a green screen, I would imagine, in the movie. And it just gives it everything she has in this movie. Whether you like the film or not, you will watch Naomi Scott's performance truly in awe. And speaking of being in awe, Lily Rose Depp for Nosferatu, aside from Demi Moore, who obviously got the nomination, of all the actresses I'm mentioning, and actors as well, there's no reason why Lily Rose Depp should not have been in the lead actress conversation this year. And I'm talking about for the regular Academy Awards. You have to think what she's doing as Ellen in this picture. She's portraying a character that was introduced in 1922 in a silent film that is considered one of the pillars of Hollywood history. Definitely if you're talking about the horror genre or vampire films. So she's taking that lore that everybody that's a cinephile pretty much knows, and she's making it her own. She is a character who is battling with her mental state in the film because of her unhealthy obsession with this entity that has kind of possessed her in a way. Of course, I'm talking about Nosferatu or Count Orlok. She feels shame and regret for the sexual relationship that they've had, for the desire that she feels for him on a daily basis, how she can succumb to his call even when she doesn't really want to deep down inside. And the film, whether it was Eggers' intention or not, does deal a lot with women in society, really, frankly, today as I'm sitting here, but definitely in the 1830s when the film takes place, and how women just weren't taken seriously. And if you said one thing or you did another thing, you were immediately dismissed or even possibly were passed off as being insane. I mean, husbands would have their wives committed to insane asylums for sleepwalking. So Lily Rose in this film really does carry that torch for femininity and what it was thought to be a woman in that time. But not only that, she's dealing with her internal demons. And I'm not just talking about Orlok. I'm talking about what she's battling with within herself and how she feels responsible for the hurt that's being caused for certain people around her. Most notably her newlywed husband that I mentioned earlier, Thomas. The things that Lily Rose does in this movie with her body, physical acting, is something even completely different from the emotional acting. She contorts her body. She does weird, crazy things that have actually been memed at this point. And I mean, we're talking about like Exorcist level stuff with her body with no effects employed. And it's just a committed, unbelievable performance that I think if the movie had gotten a little more traction, like maybe a month earlier, she could have been thrust into that conversation for lead actress. Man, what a world if her and Demi Moore had been in the 5. And the last category I'm going to talk about in depth before I show you what my 10 picture nominees would have been is for the horror Oscars actor in a leading role. David Dastmalchian for Late Night with the Devil, Hugh Grant for Heretic, Josh Hartnett for Trap, David Johnson for Alien Romulus, and Justice Smith for I Saw the TV Glow. Let's start with Justice Smith. I Saw the TV Glow is a film that I've heard friends of mine in the horror community say it's not horror. I've heard people say it's definitely horror. I've heard people say it's both, psychological, horror, whatever. It's a horrific film, especially if you are in a marginalized community. And in the film, there is a subtle trans story at the surface that carries the narrative all the way through. If you're in the trans community, or if you're trans, or if you're an ally of that community, you will immediately connect to that story, especially on a rewatch. I've seen this film a few times now. But what Justice Smith does in this film, and his kind of quiet, almost like detached performance in the first 2/3, where it's almost like he doesn't know where he is in the movie because of what his character is kind of feeling in that world, in his world, the real world. And then you have the abstract world that's taking place through the 90s TV show that he is obsessed with, and how he can be a true version of himself in that world, a true representation of who he really is. So the movie culminates in one of the more tragic, emotionally fueled scenes of the entire year, with Justice Smith at the center of that, dealing with the regret that he has in his life for not coming out to be who he is really supposed to be. And he basically is a prisoner within himself and within the world around him. Justice Smith boils in this movie his character to the point of literal explosion. In, like I said, I'm talking about the birthday party scene. If you've seen the movie, you'll know what I mean. Is an absolutely gut-wrenching, it's like a tattoo on your soul. What about Josh Hartnett and Trap? Now, truth be told, Trap was a movie that I was not a huge fan of when I initially saw it. Didn't really like it. But Josh Hartnett's performance, I absolutely was in love with. I mentioned earlier Kevin Bacon having the time of his life. Josh Hartnett was eating this role up. He gives everything he can to this almost over-the-top, definitely ridiculous kind of story of a dad taking his kid to a pop concert that would kind of mirror like a Taylor Swift concert, and being like the weird dad and trying to fit in and making those weird dad jokes. Guess what? That's me. My kids will tell you. And then on the flip side, his character is this gruesome, psychologically damaged serial killer. And he flips that switch so brilliantly. Like, you're laughing with him and you're kind of like, this is the coolest dad I want to be that kind of dad, And then the next scene, you're like, that dude scares me. Josh Hartnett really takes it up a notch in this film, and it's one of the better performances from him. We're in a bit of a Josh Hartnett renaissance, going back to Oppenheimer last year, and I've heard that he's got some other roles on the horizon that sound pretty juicy. But Trap is weird, because if it weren't for Hartnett and the committed performance that we get from him, that it's a little bit both slapsticky and ominous, I would have hated it. But because of his performance, it's one of the more enjoyable watches, because I just love watching him do his thing. I already talked about Heretic, and Hugh Grant in that movie is one of the performances that I'm mentioning today that actually was in the Oscars discussion for Best Actor. There was a world where he could have gotten into that. He actually got a couple of the precursors. So he is being lauded for that performance, but no Academy love for it. It would have been nice to see, as he plays this kind of homebody who is obsessed with theology and frankly just knowledge, and he's almost like a human Wikipedia page when it comes to religion. And these two girls, Mormon missionaries, come into his home, and it turns into a bit of a home invasion film. But the beautiful thing about Grant's performance is, because of the charm and the charisma and frankly the humor and the one-liners in this film that he delivers, you're never really scared of him. You're always kind of like trusting in him, even though he's making these two girls' lives hell in his home. But that performance just elicits a sense of, I want to be this guy's friend. I want him to kidnap me and teach me about religion. And that all comes from Hugh Grant's charm and his just world-renowned charisma. And he was brilliant in this movie. Equal parts funny, equal parts serious, and just all Hugh Grant. How about David Johnson in Alien Romulus? This could have arguably been in the supporting actor category, and I kind of battled with it a little bit. But he is on screen a lot, and of the male performances in the film, he definitely would be considered the lead. So in the film, he plays Kaylee Spaney's synthetic brother, adopted brother. So essentially a robot that she's been taking care of its whole life. He starts out kind of aloof and almost like he has the brain of a child, maybe like 10 or 11 years old, and is not really advanced in his robotics. But as the film goes on and David Johnson's character takes on personalities of other synthetics and starts to kind of accumulate knowledge as AI, his performance changes. And that's what's brilliant about the performance to me, is that it goes from here to here, 0 to 100 real quick. And he beautifully does both. He turns into a bit of a risk management synthetic, where he will help them out of scenarios at the behest by giving the short end of the stick to some of the characters in the film, but he knows that if they don't do that, everybody dies. So he becomes a bit of a villain to Kaylee Spaney and some other people in the film, but he's doing what has the highest probability for them to survive, and frankly for her to survive, because that's who he's attached to. It is a brilliant performance that has multiple layers to it, and David Johnson does the rare thing of kind of connecting AI on a human level, because in today's day and age, AI, especially in the movie business, by a lot of people, is seen as the enemy. Keep it away from me. In this movie, you sympathize with it, and you want it to be okay. You want it to be on your side. You want to be on its side. David Johnson really does a great job of bridging the humanity with the technology. And lastly, I'll talk about David Dalsmachian in Late Night with the Devil. He plays a talk show like Johnny Carson-esque type figure in the 1970s, hosting a Halloween special where he wants to do a live exorcism on air on Halloween night. So, of course, it's going to turn into a perfect platform for a horror movie. Dalsmachian, his whole career, has really been kind of a character actor, supporting actor at best. He finally gets a lead role here as the talk show host, and really is a human character who has been dealing with years of success in the talk show business, but is kind of over it and is kind of looking for new ways to kind of reinvent himself and reinvent the game, which fast forward 30 or 40 years in timeline sense, that's what we're still doing, whether you're talking about Conan O'Brien or Jimmy Kimmel, or they're all trying to do something different and be fresh. And Dalsmachian did a great job of kind of harnessing what that must feel like, especially in the late night talk show game. But he's also a bit of an everyman. You feel like you know him. You feel like you understand him. He does have a turn in the final act of the film that I also thought was brilliant. And I also thought that he did a great job at making me believe what his character basically decides to do in the movie. It's a funny performance. It's charming. It's eerie at times. But the whole time you're into this movie because he's guiding you through this movie, much like the talk show host is guiding the audience through the production of the show. It's a film that got a lot of praise when it first came out, and then it kind of got forgotten about. Don't forget about it. It's on Shudder right now if you want to watch it. Late Night with the Devil. There you go. I want to know what you guys thought of these performances that I mentioned in the horror genre for 2024. And the last slide I want to show you, and I'm just going to list them real quick, what I think the 10 Best Picture nominees this year would be if the Academy could only pull from the horror genre. Let's see. Alien, Romulus. Producers to be determined. I'm just kidding. They said that a lot on the announcements. Heretic. I Saw the TV Glow. Longlegs. Love Lies Bleeding. Nosferatu. Red Rooms. There's the international influence, by the way. Smile 2. Strange Darling. And of course, The Substance. Now you're looking at this screen and you see those 10 movies that I think would get nominated if we could only nominate horror films, and only one of them actually got nominated, The Substance, which, believe it or not, is a huge win because it has been a long time since a horror movie has been nominated for Best Picture. Like I said earlier, you would have to go back to 2017 when Get Out received multiple nominations, including Best Picture. Prior to that, if you're counting Black Swan, would have been in 2010, but you would have to go back to 1999 when M. Night Shyamalan's The Sixth Sense received a Best Picture nomination. Before that, 1991, we mentioned with Silence of the Lambs. But then guess what? From 1975 until 1991, nothing in the horror genre received a prestigious nomination. And that was since Steven Spielberg's Jaws. Of course that got nominated, guys. It's Jaws. So basically, Academy do better when it comes to horror movies. And I get to do this every year and make a video for you guys with my favorite horror performances, and also just talk about my two favorite things, the Academy Awards and horror, and ironically talk about my least favorite thing, which is how the Academy Awards rarely recognize horror. So, I don't know. Let me know what your favorite performances in the horror genre in 2024 were. What did I forget? What did I leave out? Please let me know down below in the comments. And let me know if you like this video. I'm going to try to do this every year. Also, I'm getting into my rankings of the actual nominees. So the first video that's going to drop this week is going to be my rankings, my top 10 of the films that got nominated for Best Picture at the Academy Awards this year. I'll give you my 10-1. And on that'll be my personal ranking. And on that video, I will also give you my Best Picture power rankings and what I think stands the most likelihood to actually win the gold on Oscars night, all the way down to what's way, way far out of reach, which would be number 10. And I'll talk a little bit about the criteria and why I think that in that video as well. That's coming up later this week. Make sure you subscribe. And thanks for watching this video. I hope you guys dug it. I'll see you out here next time in the garage.